Welcome to Trial by Wine. We take a closer look at crimes that highlight how fascinating humans can be. Schmitty, Swanny and Clarkey visit crimes and run them through their jury of three, debating both sides of the case to agree an appropriate, if totally fictitious, sentence. Please be advised, Trial by Wine may include explicit or disturbing content and will include drunken rambling. Listener discretion is advised. All right, how are we?
Very well. How are you, Schmitty?
Oh, I love that you leant into the microphone then. That was very sexy.
Oh.
Well, no, that's okay. You're allowed to be.
That's what I was going for. Now I just sound like an old croaky.
That's all right. We all do, because I'm still recovering from my illness, in answer to your question. Was very good. And the weather here has been quite mild, lovely autumn, mild, sunny-ish days. So I'm enjoying that. And
Well, I was going to compliment you on your little sweater.
Yeah, well, I'm actually
really see you. It's nice.
Thank you, but I'm quite warm for once, so there you go. And I've got if you remember, you slept on it actually. We had the temporary bed downstairs.
Yeah.
Well, in order to combat my echoey room, I've actually got the mattress up against the wall on the other side.
Love it.
And I've got a sleeping bag along one wall and a duvet along the other wall to put the soft furnishings in. And I think it's working, because I didn't like that setup I had the other day with that shield thing. I felt like it was cutting me off from you guys.
Yeah.
So I lashed out and bought some acoustic panels on Amazon today too. So
there you go.
Wow. Yeah, it does seem to be working very well.
Going to set my studio up. And what about you guys?
Well, we've got the dreaded lurgy, so that's always fun. So apologies if we cough throughout, but we'll try to mute ourselves. Yeah, so that's it. We're getting ready to go away for Easter, which is exciting, taking the caravan.
Where are you actually going with the caravan?
Near Cobram.
Peninsula? No.
Up to Cobram.
Just on the banks of the Murray.
I get that wrong.
Nice.
Yeah,
Have you got plans for Easter, Swanny?
No, zero. We'll just be home having a bit of a quiet one.
Coke Zero.
We've got some stuff. Yeah, Coke Zero. It's a good one. I like that. Coke Zero. Very quiet.
Fair enough. All right. Well, who are we? I'm Schmitty.
I'm Swanny.
And I'm Clarkey. And together we are
Trial by
Wine.
So what are we drinking?
Coke Zero.
Coke Zero, right?
Yep.
Yeah. I've got the WA component.
First one of the day.
Well, given that we're a little unwell, we're having a McGuigan Zero Rosé, bought from the supermarket, none other. So, yes.
It's a lovely colour.
$12 a bottle. It is a lovely colour, although it looks a little bit like pirate juice in the... I mean, not pirate juice, your mango chutney is in the
mango
glass.
chuts. Yeah, it does look a bit.
Or the damson gin. I think it's got more of the damson gin look about it.
It's not too bad.
It's rather nice with a lozenge in your mouth, isn't it?
Yeah, that really makes it zing.
A lozenge
The old
chaser.
Difflam, yeah.
How about you,
Difflam
Schmitty?
chaser.
I am drinking one of my favourite kind of, I like to call them Frankensteins, which is made up of some Kirk's sugar-free Pasito, because they've gone very retro in some of their stuff, so that's that passion fruit flavoured drink.
Passion.
With a dash of Smirnoff.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, because I don't have any mango chutneys.
Oh,
Yeah.
The cupboard's bare.
sound the alarm.
I've got a lot of sparkling still left over from the wedding, but I'm not really in the right mood for that.
That surprises me, frankly. If there's anything left over.
Oh, there was about a dozen sparklings left and about half a dozen reds. But I've got to say, given that I was accused of over-catering big time, we smashed that alcohol. So well done, everyone.
Nice.
Snaps.
Snaps for us.
Yeah.
All right.
Don't underestimate
No.
your crew.
That's right. All right. So who's got a story for us today?
I do. I have a story.
Well done.
And it's a story about finding a story in as much as anything. So I mentioned this to you guys the other day when we were talking about, I think Clarkey was talking about how he came upon his last story. And this has been a note that's been sitting in my phone probably for the last, I don't know, maybe 4 months or so. So at one point on my Facebook feed, there was some crimes that were coming through, and one of them was entitled something, which I'll tell you in a moment. And I thought, that sounds interesting. And I've just put it as a note in my phone, didn't have time to look at it at that moment. And subsequent to that, on a couple of occasions, I've dared to have a little bit of a look. And each time I've looked at it, I've had to actually close it because I can't really deal with it. Anyway, so the other day when I spoke to you guys, I thought, right, I'm going to go and delve into it and
Pull the Band-Aid off.
And, yeah, and do it. Well, I did, but that resulted in
Did you sleep?
a very sleepless
Yeah.
night. I didn't have a nightmare. I could not stop thinking about it. And it was, I don't know if it was a full moon here last night, but it was very close to it. It was so bright at 3 a.m. when I was awake. It was like there was a light on outside. So it wasn't scary in that respect. I was just so unnerved and I could not stop thinking about how hideous these crimes were. And I was umming and ahhing, should I go find other crime? What should I do? What should I do? What should I do? You know, is it right to even bring it to the table? Because I just find it so utterly repulsive that a human being has done this that I sort of wondered if I should do it or not. Anyway, so then I went back this morning and had another look. And by chance, when I was looking at the title of the killer, you know, they give them often a name, there was one that said not to be confused with, which is exactly how you came across your crime the other day, Clark.
Yeah.
And in doing that, I ended up in another crime or set of crimes that were so eerily similar that I thought, oh, right. I think the story here is about not so much me having to delve into the detail of the crime because I don't think that's right. I don't think I could do it. But talking about how these two sets of crimes come from a very similar sort of foundation.
Okay.
And that's where I think the story lies, because there's definitely a story to be told. What I don't want to do is turn listeners off. And also I think this one would probably definitely need to come with a bit of a trigger warning. There's some pretty horrendous things that are done to people that,
Okay.
it's not for everyone. But what I'll do is I'll talk more about very top line. I'll try not to go into any real detail because when I started to do that, it was
too disgusting.
Like there were things that I had access to that I just couldn't believe what I was looking at or reading. That people
I'm hoping
are prepared to record a lot of this stuff. That's what
Okay.
I find absolutely astounding.
That makes me feel a little better that we're not actually doing the same case because
All right.
I had almost the same experience last night. So
Really?
before we started recording, I was saying how I talked about thinking about having a story ready so we could do two today.
Yeah.
And I'm still in the middle of it, so I really am not. But I saw things last night that I can't unsee. And Tony's away in Brisbane. And it was the first night I've spent in this house alone.
Oh, darn.
And I gave myself the willies, the heebie-jeebies, even though it wasn't a ghosty or anything like that.
No.
It was post-mortem photographs that I looked at.
Yes.
And I went, it was. So as much as you lot always joke about me being a psycho and whatever, I know I'm not, because my reaction to this was not, oh, that's interesting. It was, oh my God, get rid of that. Oh, I can't. I wish I hadn't seen that.
I think that's where my head was at. Is this something that needs to be rehashed, revisited? So hopefully I can do it with, I will say, sort of a lightness of touch. And between these two sets of crimes, you'll start to see this similar. There's so many similarities. It blew my mind, actually. They have such similar titles. So my sources, well, that is also part of the story. When I started looking at sources, there were a whole series of these like documentary style things. So there's some professional ones that I absolutely have not looked at, but if you want to, I'm sure you could go and do that. But that is not for me. And then I was looking at other ones, and what I found was it was so creepy because what they had done was they'd been using stock shot images and then they were doing a narrative to explain what was happening. And that was like a trailer for something. It was even worse. And I was like, I can't do that either. So it was called Night Docs. And that was that was special as well. So, that was terrifying in its own way, how they sort of drew upon your imagination by using images and what had actually really happened. So I think the narrative was spot on, but because they didn't have some of the actual, images and stuff to show, they'd done illustrations and they'd done this and the other. So it was.
I know what you mean. They sort of.
It's crazy. I was like, what am I doing?
Weird visuals in that are remotely attached to what they're saying.
Yeah, and then it starts
confuses
to
your brain, I think. Yeah.
It does. And also then I sort of thought, then it's getting away from the facts. It's becoming something else. And I was like, right, so that part of that. So what I've done is I've kept it very simple to compare the two. And so I've used Wikipedia, and I'll be using that because I think chronologically it really helps me set them out as this sort of like, look at these similarities. Murderpedia.
Yeah, that's where I found the terrible things I found. Yeah.
Yeah. Allthat'sinteresting.com. And as I said, if these are crimes that you want to go and have a look at, and I'm sure they're incredibly interesting, they're just a little bit too much for my palate. I could see that there were a series of documentaries and books, and there's a lot out there. And I think that certainly the first crime I think I've heard of, and I suspect there's a lot out there if you want to go and delve deeper. But let's just see if we can have a little bit of a chat about it today and see how these killers came to be and where that where that common territory is.
Mhm.
Okay, so how to start off. So I'm going to give you an idea of how I sort of came across the two crimes. So the first killer or first criminal is called the Toybox
Oh my
killer.
God, no. All right, I'm out. Yeah, no, I do know this one. I was looking at it myself, but that's not what I was researching. I was looking at it myself
It's
the other day.
really
It's
tricky.
awful. Yeah. Yep.
So I'm hoping that I don't have to delve too deeply because I think, our imaginations can do a lot of the work for us.
How many toy boxes were killed in the
So
making of
sick.
this story?
Do you know this one, Clarky? Have you come across it?
No.
Oh,
No.
it is sick.
The Toybox killer, as he is known, is a man by the name of David Parker Ray.
David Parker Ray. Yeah.
David Parker Ray.
Yeah.
Ray Parker Jr.
And David Parker Ray was born in 1939 in New Mexico. What shall I say? Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about his background and his early childhood, and then we're going to switch to the other crime that was a crime that I happened upon because the other killer has a very similar name to the Toybox killer, and they're known as the Toolbox killers.
Oh,
can you believe that?
I don't know that one. Right.
Jeepers.
So we've gone from the Toybox killer to the
Toolbox
killer.
What could get confusing?
Killers. To start with, David Parker Ray.
Shoebox killer.
Mm.
I'm just trying to
Can
think.
you use a
What are
different-
other boxes that you would have? I was like,
Hatbox.
Hatbox killer. Oh, I like that
Yeah,
one.
my Vivian Westwood Hatbox.
Yeah.
Oh,
Sorry,
God.
Swanny. I'm trying to lighten it before we
that's
get
all
because,
right.
yep.
Swanny, can you use a different voice when you switch between the two? Just
Oh,
so that it's easy to
I
follow.
could struggle with that. I might
Okay.
struggle. I'll do my best.
Okay, well, I'll try to keep up then without it.
Oh, gosh. As I said, he was born in New Mexico in 1939. And he had a younger sister, Peggy, and they lived with their grandfather, who was a disciplinarian. The reason they lived with their grandfather was because, well, essentially his parents didn't want he or his sister. His alcoholic father would occasionally visit and, of course, rough him up and abuse him when he did visit him, which was, only occasionally. And I don't know why, but he also supplied him with sadomasochistic pornography when he was a teenager, because I think that's what all good dads do, isn't it? I don't know.
Yeah, in between bashings when you visit,
Yeah.
slip a bit of that as well.
So his childhood was anything but nice. He was also bullied at school because he didn't particularly have an easy way with girls. And I think his home life and the abuse that he was getting from his very strict grandfather, although I have read in some places that what was strict then is now considered abuse, but I do think from what I understand
this
it was
was
a little
abuse.
bit more than strict. Yeah. And he was certainly being abused by his father, but again, not always, because basically the parents had sort of moved them on to the grandfather. But when he was a teenager, he started developing sexual fantasies around raping, torturing, and even murdering women. And it was at this time that his sister actually happened upon some drawings that he had done, which were obviously of Bondi Jacks and, basically murdering girls. After completing high school, he received an honourable discharge from the United States Army, where he'd worked as a mechanic, which is important. He had been married 4 times and he had 2 children. So he was quite busy. Do you know what I mean? I think that after, serving in the army and just going to work, he had a life that was, well, I say a family life, but I mean, I think versions of there's a what's the word I'm after?
This man was not set up in a nice house with a picket fence
No.
and a dog in the garden and the kids running and playing and the wife making, apple pie in the kitchen. I don't think that was the family scenario we're looking at here.
No. But I also think that when it came to who he was in the society where he lived, and I haven't actually gone into that, where he lived was a place called Elephant Butte in New Mexico.
Wow.
And I did see some footage. There's like this very, a mesa and a butte in the American desert sort of scenario. So a butte is the flat one.
Oh, yeah.
And then no, that's wrong.
The mesa's the flat one, isn't it?
The mesa is the flat one, isn't it? Yeah. And I think the buttes are talking about. So imagine all of those kind of, it really is desert sort of territory. And he lived near a lake, which was called Elephant Butte Lake. And because of all the minerals, it was totally, I think, opaque. You couldn't actually see anything in it. And I also read that it was like full of like catfish that apparently are huge and will just
Eat you.
devour anything that comes their way. So if anything was to go into the lake,
No
one would know it was in there. And if it's not finished off by the catfish, you wouldn't be able to see. There's zero visibility. So it's that kind of really murky, quite a beautiful looking colour, but not clear at all. And I guess it's from all the mineral from the desert sand, I guess, that's in the water. One thing that I thought was there's very few things that are funny in this, but Elephant Butte is near a town, and the name of the town is actually Truth and Consequences, New Mexico.
Yep.
You can't call a town that.
It was originally called Hot Springs, and the reason it's now known as Truth and Consequences was because in 1950 there was a game show called Truth and Consequences, and there must have been some prize, but they were like,
Name
what
a town
is prepared to change its name? And I thought, well, Hot Springs didn't have a lot to
recommend it,
really.
yeah.
Exactly. Imagine how many hot springs. There's probably as many hot springs as there are.
Truth and Consequences.
No, what's the one that we always have? The Simpsons one. What's it called?
Springfield.
How many Springfields have we come across? Yeah. So Truth and Consequences is, I think, the bigger town that everybody knows. And Elephant Butte, where David Parker Ray lived, was a very small community. They called it a retirement community, but it wasn't in that sort of...
Wasn't a gated community. It was just lots of old people went and lived there.
It was sort of like the middle of nowhere, and they were mainly trailers that people lived in. It wasn't an affluent area at all. It was kind of just a dot. Nothing happened there. They did say everybody knew everybody. You'd go to the local bar. It was an existence.
Sounds like
I
a
suspect
country
it's probably
town.
Absolutely. As I said, he's a mechanic, and then he's been married a couple of times, got 2 kids. He has a relationship with his daughter called Jessie, and at one point Jessie goes to the police in, I think, about 89, and she says that her dad has tortured a woman that she knew.
Jeez.
And the police get him in, and he says, absolutely, that's what I did, because it was consensual. I'm hugely into bondage. That's my thing, actually. I've got a business. I create different things, whatever else. So what started off as a situation that could have shut this whole thing down, the daughter put herself out there, and the whole thing did a backflip, and she was back living with the dad, and he didn't push her away. She actually went towards him instead.
Oh, yeah,
and
she had a relationship with him, all right.
Part of the whole thing. And, it was intimated that they did have a sexual relation, and she did have a child later, and they were like, oh, well, it was her dad's. But I don't have any proof of any of that. But it's a case of there was that moment in time where someone went and said something.
Yeah.
And he was able to go,
yeah, no problem.
What's the problem?
Wasn't
Actually,
illegal.
I've been hugely into this. Absolutely. The magazines. Did you know that I make these,
Can I ask,
or whatever else?
Do you know if his statement of it being consensual was corroborated by the woman?
No, I don't know the answer to that, actually.
Okay.
I'm guessing
Probably not. No, she's probably
Why
nowhere
would we
around,
ask her?
so.
Yeah, she's
yeah.
swimming with
Can't
the
argue with that.
Yeah.
But I also think for your daughter to do that, she must have seen a few things that had really bothered her up until that point to go, actually, that's not right. Because most people wouldn't, would they? You wouldn't go and, shop your dad unless they'd done something really
It'd have
terrible.
to be pretty horrendous, yeah.
Yeah. That whole thing seems kind of, I was surprised that had happened. But anyway. So I'm now going to jump ahead to
Is her name,
March.
is her name Jessie Ray?
Yeah. Well, actually, that Jessie's like a name. That's not her real name. They call her that.
Okay.
I've forgotten her real name. I could find that somewhere. We're going to jump ahead to 1999. So that'll go, really.
He's 60 now.
And in 1999, Cynthia Vigil was abducted from an Albuquerque parking lot by David Parker Ray and his girlfriend, Cindy Hendy.
Cindy Hendy.
She was taken to Elephant Butte, where she was confined to a trailer and tortured.
Ugh.
After 3 days of captivity, she escaped from the trailer on March 22, 1999. Now, why this is so important, and it's so matter of fact, and there is no big build-up, whatever else is, because I think she's probably the only person to escape in this manner. And what she had escaped was the Toybox. And the Toybox was a trailer that David Parker Ray had customised to the expense of about $100,000 he'd spent on making this sort of like a totally independent unit.
Yeah,
So
it looks like a refrigerated unit, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Like
it does.
Big commercial refrigerator truck. Yeah.
He'd put air conditioning units in it. He had its own generator electrical source inside it. And
I reckon he had some soundproof panels in there too.
Oh, yes, that's very important, the soundproofing. The soundproofing, imagine the scale, it's like a semi-trailer.
Yeah.
That's the sort of scale of it. And he'd use soundproofing to create what he called his toy box. And what he did was he then equipped it with items for sexual torture And this is where it starts to become really uncomfortable to talk about. It
like something
looked like a surgery.
Yeah, it's like something out of a nightmare and of one of those horror films.
Correct. If I can explain it to you, it's where on one side there were sort of photographs of like the bondage equipment hanging down. So I guess in one respect you'd kind of expect that within a sadomasochistic environment. On the other, it was like a surgery where it had pull-out drawers with syringes, medication, knives, scalpels, basically equipment for surgery. And I guess for him, pride of place in the middle, which was a gynecological chair, I think you'd call it, obstetrics. I don't know what you'd be based on it. And that was where he would confine and torture the women that he had abducted. So by the time we get to Cynthia, this has been going on for quite some time, and Cynthia was just able to escape. So what happens is she waits till David Parker Ray has gone to work, and she's able to unlock the chains that have been binding her up because Hendy, the girlfriend, had accidentally left the keys on a table nearby. Hendy notices that Vigil's making an attempt to escape, and they have a fight. And during the struggle, Hendy broke a lamp on the captive's head, but Cynthia unlocks the chains and she stabs Hendy in the neck with an ice pick.
Take that, bitch.
Because, you just have one of those around. Of course you'd have an ice pick around if you were
torturing someone who's shackled to a bed. That's right.
Correct. Yeah. So Cynthia was able to flee. She's got imagine this, she's got an iron collar around her throat and she's got padlock chains around her.
And she's completely nude, isn't she?
And she's completely naked, yep. And battered and, bruised and bloodied and whatever else from whatever had happened to her before. And that's only after 3 days. She runs down a road and she's able to get help from a nearby homeowner who, takes her in, and he calls the police, and the police come. And she's able to lead them directly to the trailer. So, of course, they're able to capture Ray and Cindy Hendy, his girlfriend at the time, immediately. So they're detained by the police. So that is kind of the starting point. There were no bodies. There was no one reporting, with the exception of the daughter, I think it was 10 years before or something. He wasn't on anybody's radar. No one was going in and saying, this is what's happening. And you've got to wonder why that was. And what his sort of modus operandi was. He was taking, they were saying, between 5 and 6 girls a year. And when he would take them to this lair, he would detain them for a number of months. And whether it was his girlfriend, I think also the daughter was involved at different times, they would torture these women and do the most incredibly despicable, I don't even know you'd call it experiments. I don't know what you'd call what they did to them over a period of time. And then what he would do is he would drug them in a way, and I don't even know how you'd do this, but he was able to use a series of drugs, medications, whatever else, to erase their memory, and then some of them he would actually release. Yeah. And so when Cynthia is found, then they obviously make a plea, and they start to try and put together some information as to who's been in this toy box. And another victim came forward. Her name was Angelica Montano, and she had a very similar story to Cynthia Vigil. She said that she'd been held captive by Ray after Hendy invited her to her house to pick up a cake mix. Can you imagine? It's not like you're in a bar drunk and you're being dragged. I mean, it really is. Yeah, come on over. After being raped and tortured, Montano convinced the pair to release her along the highway. You're not going to believe this. She was picked up by an off-duty law enforcement officer, and she told him what had happened, but he didn't believe her. So he dropped her off at a bus stop. She also called the police, and no one followed it up. But where things get quite interesting is what they were able to do is, because as this happens time and time again, he had to film it all.
Yeah, not that it's super relevant, but I think some of the women that he took were sex workers.
Yes.
And it's wrong, but I think part of the reason that some of them weren't listened to was to do with their professional. Because remember, this is a very small town, so everyone.
Absolutely. But this comes up. This comes up every couple of weeks for us, right?
Yeah, it does.
It's so common, and it's interesting. When you look at all this stuff, there's an aftermath of one of the things, and one of the might even be Angelica Montano. I'm not sure. One of the people who was a victim, she has set up it's a charity to help people who are already at risk to try and minimize further risk. And it's prostitutes, people who are homeless, people who are living sort of on the edge of society. It's trying to give them the tools to keep themselves safer.
It does beg the question about legalized prostitution, in as much as if you're working out of a brothel You are probably safer than if you are on the street. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. But then you have someone who's going to pick up a cake mix. So these people were very,
that's right.
Open to, finding people, however, it wasn't just, as you say, prostitutes or people in a bar who, being taken advantage of. Oh God, I was going to not include it, and don't include it if you don't want to. But also like to include their dogs to rape the women as well.
What?
I know.
No.
Yeah.
Oh, it was
and
everything that your a twisted
Yeah.
mind could imagine is what they
Correct.
did to these people.
And it's one of those things where what I found interesting about, how people perceived him in the community, people quite liked him. And one of the things he was known for was how caring he was towards animals. Yeah, he used to take the animals home and, get them all
Let them have
healthy.
sex.
And then, help them abuse women with him. As I was sort of mentioning, one of the things that, again, has come up with a number of crimes that we've looked at is these criminals, these psychopaths, they like to have a recording. So what David Parker Ray was doing, no expense spared in the Toybox, he had like a full camera set up on the tripod looking directly down onto the gynecological
chair.
What's it called, with the stirrups and whatever else?
Yeah, right, yeah.
There's a list of things
that were in the toy box.
That were in there. And here it is. Because I've never heard of something like this.
I remember speculums.
Leg spreader bars.
Leg spreader bars, yeah. Lots of those.
Ray sexually presumably killed his victims using whips, chains, pulleys, straps, clamps, leg spreader bars, never heard of those, surgical blades, electric shock machines, and saws.
Don't even.
Yeah.
Inside the torture room, along with numerous sex toys, torch implements, syringes, were detailed diagrams showing ways of inflicting pain. There was the homemade electrical generator, and that was also used to torture them. So, no stone unturned. And when I was sort of talking about things that I saw that I couldn't unsee, one of them, which will sound kind of pedestrian in a way because it was a typed note, obviously typed on a typewriter back in the day, it was a list of things to do when you had somebody new come into the toy box. And
like
at one point,
an assistant or a new victim.
It would. So if
a list of a new victim,
if his girlfriend was helping set things up, this is the way you would do things.
Yeah, right.
And one of the things was also an audio recording, which was his voice, which it tells people what's going to happen to them. He lays out what they're going to do, how bad it's going to be, and at the end how you'll be drugged. And he uses the scientific name of the drug to tell them what will happen and how they'll be drugged, and they won't have any memory of what's happened to them. Which brings me on to Kelly Garrett. So when Cynthia's been found, the other girls come forward and said, hey, no one listened to me when I told you my circumstances are very similar. This other girl has since left Elephant Butte and she's now living in Colorado. And the reason was she hadn't long been married, was having some issues with her husband, had gone out with her friend, the daughter of
Jessie Ray.
Jessie Ray, yeah. And they'd gone out and had a couple of drinks, and sure enough, they took Kelly Garrett back to the toy box.
Yeah.
She tested. So the way they found her was there was very little image that they could find anybody except this one girl, this Kelly Garrett, and it was part of a tattoo that she had, and it was quite unique. It was part of a tattoo that they were able to marry it up, and that's how they found her. I don't quite know the whole logistics of how you do that. But she didn't know what had happened to her.
Yeah. What
she knew was that she had been returned by David Parker Ray to her ex-husband, and he took her back to her husband at the time, who she was having issues with, and said, I found her wandering around the beach. The beach was along the side of the lake, obviously. She was all disorientated. She doesn't seem to know where she was, what she was doing. So it was suggesting that she'd been doing drugs and that she'd been doing the wrong thing. I've helped her. Here she is. I'm giving her back to you. The husband was so disgusted in her and couldn't believe that she couldn't remember where she'd been for 3 days because they're all worried about her, that he filed for divorce, and that was the end of the marriage.
Jesus.
God.
I was so incensed by that. When you talk, I was also incensed by the police not paying attention to these reports. No. Oh, she must have had physical marks and stuff on her as well.
Yeah,
and he filed. What I read was he filed for divorce because he thought she'd had an affair.
Yeah,
she'd just been raped and tortured for 3 days, but she couldn't remember any of it because was it phenobarbital or something that he was using on them? Anyway,
I don't. I don't know how to say. One of them's called sodium. Tell me, is this the same as what you use? Sodium pentothal?
Pentothal, yeah. Sodium pentothal, yeah.
Okay. And phenobarbital.
Phenobarbital, yeah. So what did I say?
How do you know how to say them? Like they just roll off your tongue. What are they?
Well, when you use them enough and you record yourself saying it to people that you're going to torture.
I'm going to administer 15 mils of phenobarbital.
Phenobarbital, yeah.
I'm not sure. I think they might be sedatives. I don't know if they're mind altering, but yeah. Anyway, I probably know it because I read it recently. I told you I looked at this one myself.
I mean, imagine getting a knock on the door and the police going, "Did you ever live in Elephant Butte, New Mexico?"
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you ever know a man called David Parker Ray? Yeah, I did actually. I knew his daughter. All right. Come with us. And imagine finding out what had happened to you, because she'd said, of course, she'd suffered depression. She had nightmares. She had unexplained bleeding and, lots of things that had happened to her as a consequence of being tortured. But she didn't know because she couldn't remember it.
Yeah.
Those drugs are very effective. They sent the FBI apparently sent 100 agents out to examine the property surrounding the Toybox, and they were not able to identify a single human remain, and there's nothing there. So whilst they say he's a serial killer, they say he's a suspected serial killer. And so I'm going to park the Toybox killer for now. So that gives you an idea of his background and how he basically created this den that was part sort of science lab, part torture chamber, just the most evil things you could possibly think of, and what he would do to people. And he would still manage to, have girlfriends and have other people. I don't think he would take everybody there, but he kind of had this other life.
Classic serial killer.
Yeah. Quite popular kind of thing.
He kept trophies too. Yes. He kept jewelry and personal items. There's a bit of the Wolf Creekness about this one. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right. So when I was looking at the Toybox killer, I noticed that along the top of, the search, whatever else, not to be confused with the Toolbox killers. What do we got here?
Yeah, God.
Let me introduce you to the Toolbox killers, not to be confused with the Toybox killer.
Before we go on, I just want to know, did they have a tool system? Were they Ryobi fans? Were they Makita fans? I'm a bit of a Tool Pro fan. Anyway, sorry.
I bet you are. You're just the modern day version of them. You've got more access to power tools. I think they'd be old school.
Yeah, they didn't have 18-volt cordless. They're excellent.
No, they didn't. No, they didn't. But I'm pretty sure if they had been able to do it for much longer, they probably
I don't have a saw, though. Tony's got a chainsaw, little baby, which I've shown as a prop on this show before. But, I don't have one. They don't do it in the Tool Pro range, unfortunately. Anyway, I digress.
Schmitty, there are so many interests of yours that overlay to weave
Gardening.
your wicked web and have access to all these things that the rest of us sit there and go, oh, right. I wonder what she'd use that for. And then I go, oh, I know what she'd use that for.
See, this is the thing we just said before. How do people not notice these things? Or how do these people live normal lives, seemingly normal lives, and they're carrying on like that? They're sitting with you.
She's sitting amongst us.
I ran into a friend yesterday who happens to listen to our podcast, and she told me that she nearly bought a pig. And I said, she wants to get one. I said, well, before you do, can you just make sure it's good to get rid of human remains? Because I think Schmitty would be very grateful if she had somewhere that she could dump her bodies. So she's going to check that out for you.
Apparently catfish do a very good job. The Toolbox killers, again, born very same time as David Parker Ray. So we've got two gentlemen. One is called Lawrence Bittaker, and Lawrence was born in 1940. David Parker was born in 1939. So they're very much of the same era. Mm-hmm. And this sort of comes back to me thinking, I guess, fresh off Clarkie's last trial by wine. Things were different in different... Oh, God, I can't believe I'm going to say that. Things were different in different times. Oh, really? Oh, my God.
We all had toolboxes back then.
I think what you're really trying to say is how much things have changed.
Yeah.
In the last 70 years. So
absolutely.
Even when we were young, smacking kids and that wasn't a problem. It was expected. Now, 40 years later, you don't do it. So there's just a huge amount of social changes taking place. Yeah.
And we're so much more aware of what goes on. And, there'll still be horrendous crimes, as we know. There are still these things that are going on.
There are.
But I would hope, and I'm only hopeful. I mean, there's a whole other set of crimes, I guess, that come with modernity, but you would hope that some of these other things are more difficult, at least, for people to perpetrate. So the Toolbox killers are Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris. Lawrence was born in 1940, as I said, very close to the same age as David Parker Ray. Roy Norris was a bit younger. He was born in 1948. And let me give you a little bit of a background on these chaps. So,
Could you guess? Did they have poor
yeah, let me
upbringings?
guess. I mean,
Were they
surprise,
beaten?
surprise. It's
Alcoholic father.
Alcoholic parents, yeah.
Yeah, no one wants them. Lawrence was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, as the unwanted child of a couple who had chosen to not have children. So he was placed in
Jeez,
an
they didn't do a
orphanage.
very good job of that.
No, he was put in an orphanage, and he was adopted by Mr. and Mrs. George Bittaker as an infant. So far, this is the same as my story, so hopefully I don't...
And
go
you all
down
make out that I'm the
I
psychopath.
know.
Yeah, that's right.
True.
They do hide amongst us, Swanny.
They moved around frequently. He got himself into a little bit of trouble. And he sort of said later on it was just because it was compensating for a lack of love that he received from his parents. He was bored at school, found it pretty tedious, dropped out of school. And by this stage, his adoptive parents and his family had moved to California. But within a year of dropping out of school, he'd been arrested for car theft, a hit and run, and evading arrest. So he was a bit of a rat bag, it's fair to say.
Rebel without a cause.
For these offences, he was imprisoned at the California Youth Authority, where he had to remain until he was 18 years old. Upon release, his adoptive parents had disowned him and had moved to another state. See ya.
Jeez.
He would never
And how
see
old
them
was
again.
that? Was he when that happened?
18.
18. Right.
Oh, he was released when he was 18. So
Yeah.
I mean, everybody has a slightly different experience.
Oh, is it, sorry, his adoptive parents?
His adoptive
I
parents,
thought
that'd be
you
like
were-
my
sorry,
parents
yeah.
who adopted me when he was, very out of
Sorry.
when he was very young.
Birth parents. I thought they already chucked him.
So his
Oh,
birth
no,
parents
right.
got rid of him immediately.
No
And his
one
adoptive
wanted
parents
him.
went, yeah, no, I think we're done here. See you later. So Bittaker's parents left. Roy Norris was born in Colorado, 1948. He was conceived out of wedlock. His parents had married to avoid the social stigma surrounding illegitimate birth. Yeah, no big deal. That's pretty common. His father worked in a scrapyard and his mother was a drug-addicted housewife. He occasionally lived with his parents throughout his childhood and adolescence, but he repeatedly was placed in foster care families throughout the state of Colorado. He often said that he was neglected, that he was denied food and clothing by the foster families that took him in. And he also made a comment that he had been sexually abused when in the care of a Hispanic family, which is why he later had prejudice towards Hispanic people. And he said that it originated from their neglect and abuse that he'd endured with them, with that particular family. He was talking inappropriately to family members who were female, a little bit older, but I mean, oh God, I'm pretty sure that's not exactly a crime and it happens quite a lot. But when he got back from that family member's that visit with an older, I think she was in her early 20s, and said some, really graphic sexual things.
Rude shit.
Yeah, his dad threatened him with a beating. So he went out into the mountains and he attempted to commit suicide by injecting pure air into an artery in his arm.
That'll do it.
Yep.
But how do you do that? Like with
It causes
just
you
With
a
an
heart
empty
attack.
Massive heart
syringe.
attack.
with a just
yeah.
empty syringe. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Anyway, it didn't work.
Did he miss the artery?
He tried to run away.
Might have, yeah.
He was apprehended and he returned to live with his parents again. And then Norris's parents informed him that he and his younger sister were unwanted children and that they intended divorce when they both reached adolescence and they just didn't want them anymore. So that was the end of that.
Happy families.
I know.
God.
A year later, he dropped out of school, joined the Navy.
Sailed the seven seas.
Yeah, and he got an honourable discharge.
Had a great old
after doing
time.
one tour of duty. I would imagine in some respects it was probably pretty standard, right? So many people had really ordinary
Shitty
upbringing.
upbringings.
Yeah. And then
Yeah.
there's just that very fine balance of whether it tips over one way. And, for every story that you seem to hear about people who had a horrendous upbringing that's totally brought them down, there seems to be other people where they just rally against that and then create something. Maybe it's not, I'm sure it's not 50-50, but it's just, there's always seems to be this moment in someone's adolescence where they just go off the trail.
And there was no
Off
The
the
trails
rails,
and the rails and the rails.
there was no evidence that they were doing animal torture or anything
No,
like that.
nothing-
that led
nothing
to the
like we've
parents
seen
disowning
before.
them.
No.
Do you know, it's
Much
funny about the
more-
animal torture
yeah.
thing because
It is
even
very
though
funny,
that's-
that animal torture thing.
No. I just meant that
Hilarious.
Hilarious.
yes, it is prevalent in some cases, but it was one of those things that became kind of that early FBI profiler
Yeah.
idea of if they've done that, then they're really likely to do this. But it's actually a lot less common than you would imagine in serial killers. Yeah.
Is that right?
I was just more so about bad, antisocial behaviour. Did the parents disown them because they pushed them too far, did horrific things, whatever it might be, but it doesn't sound like that.
No, I don't think it was. I think they were
It was just a bad youth and they didn't want him anyway.
I would say
parents were
that
the
up
shit
until
parents.
that point, still rat bags and just a total indifference on behalf of their parents who just either didn't want to be there or weren't interested. And I think it was Bittaker who was in foster care. That sounds a bit more...
What was the name of the guy you did the other day who stole the youth of the kids from the college? And he told them all that they were victims of bad parenting.
That's right.
He had the wrong audience. These guys were victims of bad parenting. Yeah.
Totally. Now we're at sort of this junction where they're young adults, and this is when they sort of start to get themselves into a little bit more trouble. But Bittaker, it's not that he's actually going after women per se. He's getting himself into... He's more sort of violent. There's a series of sort of petty crimes and in and out of, detention, whatever else. But burglary. But the last one, he assaults someone. So he was arrested for assault with attempt to commit murder after he stabbed a young supermarket employee who had accused him of stealing. So you see a real escalation here where, all the other stuff was just, I could list it all, but
Shits
whatever.
and giggles.
Yeah, for him, certainly. But this is when it really takes quite a turn. The supermarket employee had observed Bittaker stealing a steak and had followed Bittaker outside into the store's parking lot, where he asked Bittaker whether he had forgotten to pay. Forgotten to pay, mate? Bittaker responded by stabbing his pursuer in the chest, narrowly missing his heart.
Jesus.
He attempted to flee, but luckily he was quickly restrained by some other employees. The employee survived, but Bittaker was convicted of the lesser charge of assault with a deadly weapon, and he was sent to California's men's colony in San Luis Obispo. So that's how he arrives at California's men's colony, which is important. So that was Bittaker. Norris, he was a little bit more after the sexy time, and he liked...
Let's call it what it is, the rapey time.
Yes. He has a series of arrests, and most of them revolve around, attacking women. In November 1969, he was arrested for his first known sexual offence, charged with both rape and assault with attempt to commit rape. Another incident, he was, forcing his way into a car with a lone woman. In May 1970, on bail for another offence, he attacked a female student who he had been stalking on the grounds of the San Diego State University campus. He repeatedly struck her on the back of the head with a rock until she slumped to her knees before he repeatedly beat her head against the sidewalk as he knelt upon her lower back.
Oh, Jesus.
Did she survive or did she dead?
I think she survived. Shortly thereafter, Norris was charged with assault with a deadly weapon. He was committed to 5 years imprisonment.
Sidewalk?
Yeah.
Or the rock?
Where he was classified as
The
a
Rock,
mentally
I'd say.
disordered sex offender. So that's in 1970. He's released from the state hospital, 5 years probation. And then just 3 months after his release, Norris approached a 27-year-old woman walking home from a restaurant in Redondo Beach and offered her a ride on his motorcycle. When she declined, he parked his motorcycle, grabbed the woman's scarf, twisting it around her neck before informing her he intended to rape her and dragging her into nearby bushes. Fearing for her life, the woman did not resist the rape. Oh, God. Although the rape was reported to police, they was initially unable to find the perpetrator. However, a month later, she recognises his motorcycle, whatever else. Anyway, he's arrested for rape. He's tried, convicted, and he's sent off to, did you chambers, what a coincidence, California Men's Colony in San Luis
yes.
Obispo.
Oh. And who did he meet there,
What
do you think?
do you know? While incarcerated at the California Men's Colony, Norris met and befriended Bittaker.
They had some things in common.
Were they roomies?
Didn't they? Didn't they?
Water finds its own level.
Water find it. That is the saying for the day. At first, I don't think that they were friends per se, but the pair gradually became more closely acquainted and began becoming a bit more
Swapping
friendly.
stories.
Yep. According to Norris, Bittaker had actually saved him from being attacked by fellow inmates on at least 2 occasions. And by 1978, the pair had become close acquaintances. Forgive me, I need to read this. Discovering they shared an interest in sexual violence and misogyny, with Norris also divulging to Bittaker, and the biggest stimulation for him was seeing frightened young women, adding this was the primary reason he had amassed a lengthy record for sexual offences. Bittaker, who is not known to have committed any sexual offences prior to meeting Norris, himself divulged to Norris that if he ever raped a woman, he would kill her. so as not to leave a witness to the crime. So can you imagine what these pair were just chitty-chatting about whilst they're locked up in prison?
It sounds like so much fun.
Do you remember when Ed Kemper was working at he was actually an inmate of a psychiatric hospital after he killed his grandparents? That's what the inmates told him. If you're going to rape a woman, you must kill her so that there's no witness to the crime.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
So clearly that's a common conversation in these places.
Yeah, I don't doubt that. So I was thinking a sort of where we're about to head to is where they start planning, and they have this sort of fantasy, like, quite often you hear men talk about fantasy football. Not these pair. They come up with their fantasy sort of rape scenarios and what they're going to do to women when they get out. So when they're alone, the pair regularly discuss plans to assault and murder teenage girls after they were released. The shared fantasy evolved into an elaborate plan to murder one girl of each teenage year group from 13 through to 19.
Each.
Yeah. So the idea was that once they were out of jail, because they would have different release times, that they would become reacquainted, and then they would put their fantasy rape
plan into action.
And sure enough. So Bittaker was released from the California men's colony in 1978, October 15. He returned to Los Angeles, where he found work as a skilled machinist. And again, quite popular, made friends, although, being in prison, it didn't seem to put other people off. He had a reputation for being quite generous. He earned quite a nice amount of money. As a machinist, he was helpful. He donated to the Salvation Army. And what he was particularly good at was bringing people around him. And how did he do that? With alcohol and marijuana. Young people, you what's the saying, you put it on offer, they'll turn up, and then that's
if you build it,
and they will come. Build it, and they will come. So he was sort of setting up this life. So that's late 1978. So 3 months after Bittaker, Norris was released from prison, and he moved into his mum's home in Redondo Beach, which is just still in California. Within 1 month of his release, he had raped a woman whom he then simply abandoned in the desert.
Was she alive?
I think so.
Right.
Yeah. He soon found employment as an electrician. I mean, you've got stuff to do. You work, you rape, you
got
work,
to earn
you rape,
some money.
Yeah.
What is the expression? You work to live, you don't live to work.
These guys don't know how to do that. But shortly thereafter, he received a letter from Bittaker. Oh, can you imagine what it said? So in late February, they haven't even
This is
been
not
out that long.
Shawshank Redemption, where they meet on a beach and have a nice conversation at the end.
They haven't gone to Mexico, no. In late February, the pair met at a hotel, and they rekindled their kidnap and rape plan. In order for the pair to abduct teenage girls, Bittaker decided they would need a van as opposed to a car. With financial assistance from Norris, Bittaker purchased a silver grey GMC Vandura in February 1979. Listen to this. The vehicle was windowless on one side and it had a large passenger side sliding door. It is literally like kidnapping 101, right? You'll need to get a van. Yeah.
We need to get one of those rapist vans.
I wonder if that's what was in the marketing brochure for the van.
Yeah.
Excellent for sliding door. Yeah. He realised he or Norris could pull up to a teenage girl real close and not have to open the doors all the way. The pair would nickname this their Murder Mac. Why do they call it a Mac? Why is it a Mac?
Murder Mac. Maybe it's a Mac truck version.
No, they call it a Mac, but a Murder Mac. That's what they call the thing.
Murder Mac and cheese.
So from February to June 1979, Bittaker and Norris picked up over 20 female hitchhikers. The pair did not assault these girls in any manner.
That's like Ed Kemper. He did the same thing. He picked up, he reckons, hundreds of women and he never assaulted them.
Correct.
But he fantasized about it while he was picking them up. Yeah.
These guys were just working out how they were going to make it work. The pair did not assault these girls in any manner. These practice runs were merely a way for them to develop ruses to lure girls into the van voluntarily and of discovering secluded locations.
They were getting their hook.
Correct. By April, they'd found an isolated fire road in the San Gabriel Mountains where Bittaker broke open a locked gate with a crowbar and replaced the lock with one of his own. Now, as I did with the Toybox killer, I'm going to jump ahead to the point where so we don't have to go. It is 1, 2, skip. Well, 4. So, yeah. Suffice to say, I'll say then, so Lucinda Lynn Schaefer, Andrea Joy Hall, Jackie Doris Gilliam, and Jacqueline Lee Lamp are all victims of the Toolbox killer until we get to Shirley Lynette Ledford. And I'll just, because what happens to her is indicative of what happened to the rest. No one needs to hear it all. And with respect to the other women, I just...
Victims.
Yeah, awful. Bittaker and Norris abducted their final victim, 16-year-old Shirley Lynette Ledford, on October 31, 1979. So remember, they'd only got out of prison, Bittaker, a year ago, and what's his name? Norris hadn't even been out for a year. They really got onto their plan quite quickly once they were reacquainted.
They're
And
doers.
they are doers. They did their reconnaissance missions, and then they're on the job.
They were both ex-military too, weren't they?
Yeah, but when we say military, it's more like, I don't know if it's military when we're thinking of SAS and they're like good at anything.
No.
Just done.
But they did it too. It's more training. It's more process. It's it's
yeah.
Walking around with an M60 like Andy Albury did.
No, it wasn't so much that.
Donkey shooter.
Yeah.
So Shirley Ledford was abducted as she stood outside a gas station, hitchhiking home from a Halloween party. Ooh.
Don't hitchhike.
In a suburb of Los Angeles. Oh, my God. This whole thing. And it's like when we did Clarkie's last one. That is one of those things of that time, right?
And
hitchhiking.
Ed Kemper picked up women because they wanted a lift.
Yep. Everybody needed a lift. And no one was tracking your phone. You weren't sending a message or calling someone. You were on your own, right?
Rose and Fred West, how do you think they picked up their victims?
God.
Apart from their own children, it was all hitchhikers, yeah.
Investigators believe Ledford accepted a ride from Bittaker and Norris because she recognised Bittaker, as he is known to have frequented the restaurant in which she held a part-time job. So it's that thing again where we've talked about people being the fabric of society and they got all this other stuff going on in the dark. Upon accepting the offer of a lift home and entering the van, Ledford was offered marijuana by Norris, which she refused. Bittaker drove the van to a secluded street where Norris drew a knife, then bound and gagged Ledford with construction tape. I don't suppose I've actually gone on to tell you why they're called the Toolbox Killers, have I? I think you're about to find out.
Figure in that murder map they've got a toolbox, yeah.
Correct. I think you're about to find out. Bittaker then traded places with Norris, who drove in an aimless manner for an excess of an hour as Bittaker remained with Ledford in the back of the van. After removing the construction tape from the girl's mouth and legs, Bittaker tormented Ledford, initially slapping and mocking her, then beating her with his fist as he repeatedly shouted for her to say something. Then, as Ledford began screaming, shouting for her to scream louder, as Ledford continued screaming, Bittaker began asking her as he struck her, "What's the matter? Don't you like to scream?" As Ledford began to cry, she pleaded with Bittaker, repeatedly saying, "No, don't touch me." In response, Bittaker again ordered her to scream as loud as she wished, then began alternately striking her with a hammer, beating her breast with his fist, and torturing her with pliers, both between and throughout instances when he raped and sodomized her. Repeatedly, Ledford can be heard pleading for the abuse to cease and making statements as, "Oh, no."
What do you mean heard? They recorded it?
Correct.
Oh, what is it with these dickheads?
Yeah.
I think it's so they can relive it, but anyway, yeah.
As sounds of Bittaker alternately extracting either the sledgehammer or the pliers from the toolbox can be heard on a tape recorder he had switched on after entering the rear of the van. Norris later described hearing constant screams emanating from the rear of the van as he drove. Shortly after Norris switched places with Bittaker, he himself switched on the tape recorder. I like that. That's, they don't miss that in the whole, hang on, must record this, that Bittaker had used to record much of the time he had in the rear of the van with Ledford. Norris first shouted for Ledford to go ahead and scream or I'll make you scream. In response, Ledford pleaded, "I'll scream if you stop hitting me," then emitted several high-pitched screams as Norris encouraged her to continue until he ordered her to stop. Norris then reached for the sledgehammer as Ledford, seeing him do this, screamed, "Oh no." Norris then struck Ledford once upon the left elbow. In response, she informed Norris he had broken her elbow before pleading, "Don't hit me again." In response, Norris raised the sledgehammer as she repeatedly screamed, "No." He struck her 25 consecutive times upon the same elbow with the sledgehammer before her asking her, "What are you snivelling about?" as she continuously screamed and wept. After approximately 2 hours of captivity, Norris killed Ledford by strangling her with a wire coat hanger, which he tightened with pliers. Ledford did not react much to the act of strangulation, although she died with her eyes open. I don't know how they know it. Bittaker then opted to discard her body on a random lawn in order to view the reaction from the press.
I'm guessing they found her with her eyes open.
The pair drove to a randomly selected house in Sunda where Norris's discarded Ledford's body in a bed of ivy upon the front lawn. Her body was found by a jogger the following morning. An autopsy revealed that in addition to having been sexually violated, she had died of strangulation after receiving extensive blunt force trauma to the face, head, breast, and left elbow. Her genitalia and rectum had been torn, caused in part by Bitika having inserted pliers inside her body. In addition, her left hand bore a puncture wound and a finger on her right hand had been slashed. Bitika would later claim that the tape recording the pair had created of Ledford's clear abuse and torture offered nothing other than the evidence of a threesome.
Oh, what?
Oh, well, they're sick and stupid.
Adding that, toward the very end, Ledford was screaming for him and Norris to kill her. That I don't doubt.
No,
I don't doubt that.
Just finish me.
Ugh.
In November 1979, so that was, October, Norris became reacquainted with a friend, Joseph Jackson, an individual with whom he'd previously been incarcerated with. Norris confided in Jackson regarding his and Bitika's exploits over the previous 5 months, including graphic details of the murder of Shirley Ledford, the one I was just telling you about, the only victim whose body had been found at that time. Norris also divulged to Jackson that in addition to the 5 murders he and Bitika had committed, there had been 3 additional incidents in which he and Bitika had abducted or attempted to abduct young women who had either escaped their attackers or in one instance they'd actually raped but released. I mean,
Just practice run.
Upon hearing Norris's confessions, Jackson consulted his attorney, who advised him to inform authorities. He agreed, and he and his attorney informed the Los Angeles Police Department, who in turn relayed the 2 men to the Hermosa Beach Police. A Hermosa Beach detective named Paul Bunnan was assigned to investigate Jackson's claims as to Norris's confessions of the murder.
Sorry, can you just remind me, was Jackson a previous
he was
California
just a
colony guy?
Yeah, he was actually, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know if that's where he'd spent time with them, but yes, he had. It does say that. The detective, Binham, initially noted that Jackson's statements as to Norris's confessions didn't match reports on file of several teenage girls who had been reported missing over the 5 months. In addition, the incidents Norris had confided to Jackson where he claimed he and Bitika had sprayed mace on the face of a woman who had then been dragged into Bitika's GMC van and raped by both men matched a report filed in relation to an incident that occurred on September 30. In this file report, a young woman named Robin Robeck had mace sprayed in her face before being dragged into a van and raped by 2 Caucasian men. Although Robeck had reported the abduction and rape to police, they had been unable to identify the assailant, so it's starting to fall into place. He dispatched an investigator to visit Robeck at her residence in Oregon to show her a series of mugshots. Without hesitation, she positively identified 2 photos presented to her of those men who had kidnapped and raped her on September 30. The 2 individuals were, of course, Bitika and Norris. Upon linking Bitika and Norris to the rape of Robin Robeck, the Hermosa Beach police placed them under surveillance. Within days, Norris had been seen dealing marijuana and he was arrested for breaking parole violation. The same day at the Burbank motel where he resided, Bitika was arrested for the rape of Robin Robeck. Although Robeck had identified the mugshot, she didn't positively identify them in a police lineup.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, police had observed Norris dealing in marijuana, so they still had reason to
charges to hold them.
Correct.
Yeah.
A search of Bitika's apartment, and this comes back to what you were sort of talking about before, Schmitty, revealed several Polaroid photographs which were determined as depicting Hall and Gillum. Those 2 other girls, both of whom had been reported as missing earlier the same year. Inside Bitika's van, investigators discovered a sledgehammer, a plastic bag filled with lead weights, a book detailing how to locate police radio frequencies, a jar of Vaseline, 2 necklaces, later confirmed as belonging to 2 of the victims, and a tape recording of a young woman in obvious distress, screaming and repeatedly pleading for mercy while being tortured and sexually abused. Inside Norris's apartment, police discovered a bracelet he had taken from Ledford's body as a souvenir. Also found at the homes of both Bitika and Norris were Polaroid pictures of almost 500 teenage girls and young women, most of which had apparently been taken at Redondo Beach, Hermosa Beach, and others had been taken at Burbank High School. Most of these had been taken, of course, without the girls' knowledge or consent.
So this is just like spotting.
Yeah. I think it's fair to say that you can see the similarities of the way these men have sort of started off with these,
fantasies,
pretty rough childhoods.
Oh yeah, sorry.
And then it just escalates into something so macabre so quickly, and it's all about being violent towards women. It's not really being. I mean, I know one of them attacked a store guy, but it's all about really torture. It's about torturing women. That's all that they're interested in doing. Whether it's raping them, using pliers on them, whatever
It's very Freudian. Yes.
I know. It's
all about
terrible.
the relationship with the mother and her child, and if the son
just don't
feels
have
it's
it, yeah.
rejected by the mother, then
Yeah.
they go on to hate women.
It's just
not all, obviously, but you know.
Yeah. So with respect to Whittaker and Norris, they were found guilty of first-degree murder, 5 counts, kidnapping and rape.
In what state?
In California. And what happened was Lawrence Whittaker, who basically Norris testified against, he got the death penalty, whereas Norris, who testified against Whittaker, he got first-degree murder, 4 counts, and a second-degree murder, 1 count, kidnapping, rape, robbery. And he got life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 30 years.
Really?
However, both of them have died.
Good.
So Whittaker died awaiting execution in 2019 at the age of 79. And Norris also died in prison, and he just died, didn't he? Let me read that, in 2020, age 72.
So died of natural causes, not
They both
of a
did,
bike seat.
No, well, the thing is, it just very interesting. They didn't tell you what that. One of them died of Whittaker, I think. No, not Whittaker. It doesn't say what either of them died of. I wonder if maybe them died of COVID or something. It doesn't say. And I thought that's weird. I would have thought they would have said something about how they died, but they didn't. Interestingly, it's not really interesting. It's very macabre, really. You know, coming back to what are these people like after they've been imprisoned for all of these years? What's their attitude towards the crimes that they've committed? Whittaker granted several death row interviews following his 1981 conviction. He never expressed any remorse for his crimes, repeatedly stating the only remorse he felt had been for the fact that he and Norris were arrested, thus ruining his own life. He corresponded with numerous individuals, responding to letters he received with the nickname Pliers.
What a flog.
He just sounds like whilst he was incarcerated, he filed for more than 40 frivolous lawsuits. So in the end, there was a name for it where he's called a vexatious litigant. Yes!
Litigator.
How did you know that? I never heard of it. Well, there you go. Although Norris readily admitted that he enjoyed the acts of rape with the victims, he claimed only Whittaker enjoyed the acts of torture and murder, stating, "I didn't enjoy killing. That was Lawrence. It was his favourite part, watching the women struggle to live, knowing he'd soon be taking their life."
I believe that.
Both investigators and psychologists have stated Norris derived equally extreme gratification from the domination, abuse and torture inflicted upon the victims as Whittaker. These
he wanted them to be frightened. He wanted to hurt them.
Oh, yeah. Have also harked... Oh, sorry.
The way you described his early MO, he was much more of a rapist than a murderer.
Oh, yes. He was
Doesn't
an
mean
absolute sexual predator, right?
But it doesn't mean it doesn't escalate. But if he hadn't met that bloke, he may have gone on to just do lots more raping, which is no less traumatic for people to survive.
But I take your point.
Survive. Yeah.
The pair of them together were this sort of like toxic thing that they enabled each other to do the very worst things.
Yeah.
So just my final note on the Toolbox killers was the audio that I sort of read out to you sort of longhand. That audio cassette that Whittaker and Norris created of themselves raping and torturing Ledford remains in the possession of the FBI Academy. This recording is used to train and desensitize. That's important. FBI agents to the raw reality of torture and murder.
That's how bad it is.
Yeah. That is the Toolbox killers and the sort of the aftermath of David Parker Ray, the Toybox killer. There were never any bodies found. No. So he is a suspected serial killer. No. And so he had to go on trial for, obviously, the abduction, torture, rape, whatever else he did. Cynthia, I've got their other names, Angelica and Kelly. Yep.
Any idea how many people they suspect he's killed?
60 plus, they think.
It was a lot, yeah.
They reckon, and it was over a long period of time as well.
Because, as I said earlier, he took mementos.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of mementos, yeah.
So whereas the Toolbox killers, that was in a period of 6 months that they murdered 5 women, and the other stuff, sits peripheral to that. But with David Parker Ray, it was over decades, and where there were people that took him, they were saying, "Oh, we think he put a body here." They never found anything.
No, that's right, because I think they exhumed most of the land because he had the big trailer at the back and he had the house at the front.
Yep.
You know, a bit of land as well, and they dug a lot of it up. And there were, as I said earlier, there were other people involved with it who said, "Oh, I think he's dumped them there." But you're right. Maybe I didn't read it. I didn't know about the catfish thing, so maybe you're right. Maybe that was his favourite dumping ground.
I don't think there was any proof. That was just they would, when they just sort of try and paint a picture of the area that within which they lived. It was a really desolate area. You go and there's ravines everywhere in the desert, and then they've got this lake that seems rather ominous, to say the least.
They could have just put him in acid or something. Who knows what he did?
Oh, well, that's interesting that you should bring that up, because the Toolbox killers, I read somewhere that they'd found acid at one of their apartments, and they'd planned to use that on their next victim.
Oh, God.
So there's so many points of commonality where it's like, how can we hurt someone? What more damage can we, torture can we inflict?
We just want to, we want to eke every
absolutely
scream, every horror. Oh God, well that's dark.
Yeah. So David Parker Ray was zero murders confirmed, 3+ survivors, obviously, of the abduction, rape, torture, and then 60+ suspected murders. And what he got for that is crime spree, they think, went from 1957 to 1999, and he was given a criminal penalty of 224 years of imprisonment. And
he was 61 at the
when
time
he died,
they arrested him?
Let's have a look.
He was 61 when
he
he
died.
died
At 62. Yeah, he was 61.
62.
And that's the thing, that
it's just
he only
not
served
fair.
3 years.
That's right.
Because he died 8 months after he was sentenced to that 224.
What a prick.
I found this quote interesting. Mary Ellen O'Toole, Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI agent in Virginia, and the FBI's foremost expert in the field of investigating criminal sexual sadism, testified that examination of Ray's home, the trailer he had converted into his infamous Toybox, and the sexual paraphernalia and drawings found there suggest that Ray is a criminal sexual sadist. She said Ray's Toybox and custom equipment were extremely impressive in terms of sexual sadism, their potential lethality, and the time, money, and effort it took to keep them a secret. O'Toole said there is no known therapy for Ray's paraphilia, which is psychosexual disorder, and that its corresponding behaviour can be stopped only by apprehension.
And death.
Okay.
True fact.
Apprehension, so you can't do it. Because, as we've discussed before, you put someone in an all-male prison and they no longer have the objects of their desire around them. So, of course, they become model prisoners and then they get let out again.
So,
well done, because they were both very dark.
Yeah,
and
very, very dark.
a lot of you didn't delve into the stuff that would have been, the titillating, horrible, macabre shit, but you painted an excellent picture of 3.
I think your imagination does
if not
a
5
good enough
complete
job,
sickos. Because
right?
Cindy Hendy, as far as I'm concerned,
Oh, yeah.
She went to town too. She was an evil person.
Yeah, so Schmitty's sort of talking about around David Parker Ray, there were a cast of others who at times
please don't say that. I work in theatre. I don't like the idea of a cast.
And some of them obviously were tried and did time as well. But I've just tried to focus on him.
Well, he was
There's
the master
big
of
stories.
it.
It was hard to try and stay out of the detail if I went into talking about some of these. People like he wasn't doing it all on his own, and although mainly. He was definitely the ringleader. There's no doubt about that. And, people would come in and out of his life that would play, that role, whether it be, assisting him or observing what he was doing at different times or helping lure people.
His daughter, Jessie Ray.
That's more to the point.
Right off.
It's when other women do that to other women and, oh, God.
And it's not even it's like I mentioned earlier, Rose West. It's not even like I'm doing it because if I don't do it, I think he'll do it to me. They're just as sick. They're in it. They're enjoying it.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness
and
me.
And on that note, just to take things to a slightly different place, when I was in an absolute sort of panic early this morning because I thought, I don't think I can take that story to the table, I thought, I looked up funny crimes or something, and I'll tell you what, there's not many funny crimes. Do you think
I've been doing the same
put-
thing. I thought I'd do a light touch, and I was like, can't find anything.
A couple discovered a burglar in their house after the burglar laughed at the husband's joke. I didn't know if I could go too deep on that.
That's a good one.
A man reports thieves stole his cannabis plant and gets himself arrested. This is my favourite. A man's flatulence gets him charged with battery. West Virginia man charged with battery for farting on a cop. Yeah, so I did try and steer us away from this. But
no, there's not that much on the really, really funny stuff.
A man eats his own underwear hoping to beat a breathalyzer test. The funniest bit about that article was the fact that the day that he was in court, there were a class of law students were in there having to listen to it, and they had to be asked to leave because they couldn't compose themselves.
Couldn't stop giggling.
Yeah. I panicked because I thought it's so dark, and no one.
No, but I'm glad you did
it
it because I was going to do the Toybox killer. So now that burden.
I'm just glad to get it off my phone because it's been there for months, and I look at it and I go, oh God, I don't think I can look at it today. Pretty hardcore.
No, you've lifted the burden from me, and I did like the way you brought in I had never heard of the Toolbox killers.
No,
but you're right. That whole connection of recording it ourselves.
There's so many, parallels. It's just
bringing people
terrifying.
into it, and
because when I put them side
the
by
dregs
side,
of humanity.
Exactly. When you put them side by side, and their end game.
So I'm laughing because I don't know if you noticed earlier, but Clarky put a beanie on because
yes, I saw that. It's not well done.
But he's put it over his headset, so he looks like this sort of gumnut baby.
Yeah, got big ears.
But Clarky looks rather comedic anyway.
He just looks, and he looks a bit miserable and poor.
I know, poor baby. So
put him to bed.
You need to put him to bed. Tuck him in.
Oh, I wasn't laughing.
Rub some
How
Vicks on his
nice
chest,
of you to
please.
laugh at me, Schmitty.
Yeah,
That's
some
really
Vicks.
sweet.
Rub some Vicks on his chest.
When you had your knees up and you've got blue trackies on as well,
Yeah.
you really looked like a little gumnut baby. But she was, at that point in time, I think we were in the middle of raping and murdering that poor woman. So I was like, I can't laugh at this. Focus. Oof. All right. So to sentencing.
Do you know what I was thinking of in terms of sentencing?
Go on.
Right. So as I was sort of saying, when I look at the two side by side, the end game is the same for both of them. All they want to do is inflict the most pain,
horrendous
torture
pain
on women, right?
Yeah.
And then there seems to be the same starting point, which are children of parents who don't take care of them, let alone love them or nurture them or whatever else. So to try and steer clear of anything else more macabre, I'm going to say that I would like to sentence the parents and the people who are in charge of young, influential minds. I don't think you need to do a whole lot. I just think you need to sort of show kids that you care enough and be there for them. Yeah, there's not much more than that I think that's required. Anything else is a bonus. But when you really are abusing people and showing them that they're, worth nothing to you and you're the person who's supposed to be looking after them and it's supposed to be unconditional, it does seem to put people on a path of destruction and, hurt other people.
As you said, not all people, but
no.
I tend to agree in as much as you made them. You have a responsibility, and I think...
Not just for Christmas.
I understand there's mental health and I understand there's financial issues and, we didn't intend to do this. We didn't want to have kids or we weren't going to we got married and we don't really like each other. And so I get that there's all that.
Yeah.
But you produced a child. And Clarky said it before and he has said before there are people who just because you can't have children doesn't mean you should. And
correct.
We've talked about how you have to have a license to have a dog, and yet there doesn't seem to be any sort of controls around parenting, although there are much more now. And go back to your point, Carla, about the world having changed dramatically, and the world had to change because of these sorts of scenarios.
There's still plenty of this that goes on when
Yeah, but I think we
less.
have a much better understanding of psychology and the implications of this sort of
behaviour and the red flags that you see now. Yeah,
but also just what triggers a person to behave in certain fashions.
Yeah.
So I agree that the parents are at fault, but I think as a
I'm not
person
saying
who
they're
had
at
a
fault.
good
I'm
parent.
just saying they've done a terrible job, yeah.
At the same time, and the other side of it is there are how many other people statistically who had similarly poor upbringings and backgrounds who didn't go on to rape and murder, who didn't build for $100,000. I mean, that man, he was a saver. He knew how to put his cash away. You used to laugh at me and my Schmitty, can you tell say saved like that? But honestly, I couldn't have put 100 grand away.
I don't know if I'd say David Parker Ray. Can you tell me how you saved like that?
It's too many syllables for a start. But he was dedicated to what he was doing. And so I think there's more to it than just a bad upbringing. I think there's a predilection somewhere psychologically to violence against other people, which has to be owned by the person who committed the crime.
Agreed. I agree. That was just my softly way of going, I don't want to talk
Don't
about
worry,
anything
Clarky and I will be
more
really
torturous.
nasty.
I was just trying to go, oh my God.
Sledgehammers and pliers
toolboxes.
and
Schmitty's going to her own toolbox.
I mean, if you're going to strangle someone, a coat hanger,
right?
Even
With
that,
pliers,
it was like,
come on.
I was like, that sometimes they're a little, as Swanny often says, that's what we took from it. I'm like, oh my God, how horrendous, because that wouldn't have been a quick thing. That would have taken a fair amount of time to happen. And then the agony that poor woman would have been in as well, anyway, shocking. So, boys, do you have a sentence before I launch into something? Because I'm still formulating. So.
Yeah, okay. I struggle with it because I understand what you're saying about the parents, Carla, but I think the horror of what they did 100% sits with them. Nobody should be able to explain away their horrid behaviour by anyone else. No one puts them in a situation where that's their only option. I think the fact that they're getting joy from it is just, it made me feel sick listening to.
You are 100% correct, and I 100% agree. I think I was just trying to avoid having to sentence these guys because I just can't deal with them at all. But yeah, you are totally right. A terrible upbringing does not make you a sadistic torturer.
No, I agree. And so I kind of ummed and ahed about, do we torture them the way they tortured people, blah, blah, blah. And I don't want to spend any time with them. I guess where I landed is I think that we should just chop off their arms and legs when they're about 15 and leave them. And then they can't hurt anyone. They can't do anything. They will have a shit life. I don't care. It'll stop them doing the horror that they did.
Minority Report stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, just gross.
It's like unmaking them, which is I unmade someone the other day. Yeah, see, all right, I'm going to go to the macabre side of it because they all died in prison. None of them actually saw out their sentence.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's
no, but it was though because that's what someone.
but
I think it was. Sorry, Kelly Garrett. I think was the one she was the one who with the tattoo that they found. She didn't want him to get the death sentence. She said because that would be too easy. She wanted him to live a long life in prison. Sadly, that didn't happen. I don't think 3 years is a long life in prison. So that I think they all feel a bit cheated. I think he died of a heart attack or something.
Oh, yeah, he did. He died of a heart attack. Yeah. And I think her husband needs to wake up to himself, and I hope he has some remorse for not listening or not paying attention to what would have been just physical cues that something horrendous had happened. Just to turn around and say, oh, look, what a great excuse. My wife showed up, she's been out. Oh, you big, yeah, exactly. I mean, we've talked about misogyny of the actual perpetrators, but, disgusts me. But I'm not going to, do anything terrible to him. I'm sure he has subsequently learned the error of his ways. But, I talked earlier about my Tool Pro collection. And as my toolbox on this one is I have a grinder, I have a drill, I have, what have I got? I've got
you name it, she's got it.
No, I haven't because Tool Pro's a bit limited, unfortunately. Although I can borrow the Makita range from Tony. Not Makita, Ryobi. So I've got a chainsaw. Then if I delve into Tony's toolbox, he's not here to tell me not to do this. I've got a little chainsaw. I've got multi-tools. I think multi-tools would be quite uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking I'm going to get a drill and I'm going to drill into certainly the Toolbox drill killers, both of their elbows, and then I'm going to
and by the way, they're not allowed to die at 71 or whatever they died at. They're going to live through this. And then I might get a coat hanger and I might start to suffocate them or strangle them. And then just when their eyes are bulging and their tongue is thickening, as is what happens when you are strangled, I'm going to then release that so they can recover and do it all again. And I'm going to inflict the pain. And I'm not going to do it because I'm getting any satisfaction out of it. I'm going to do it because they need to feel what they did to other people.
Yeah.
I'm not deriving any satisfaction from it apart from that they need to live what they put other people through. And, you know, you didn't talk about their other victims, but as you say, probably very similar scenario. They had so much time to back away from this. I was just joking around when we were in prison. You know, I don't want to do that. You know, I'm going to, no.
It's just japes.
It was just japes and shits and giggles, but no. So, yeah, I'm going to, unfortunately, be the one who brings the torture to the three of them. And there's a bit for me
I'm actually quite comfortable with that today, actually, surprisingly, or not surprisingly.
I've really got issues with Cindy Hendy and Jessie Ray, women who torture other women, who know...
And help acquire other women for men to do that sort of stuff. That's the pits, isn't it?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what you actually did, like, you know, whether you... engaged in it.
They know.
But from my reading, I think they did it.
Tortured and murdered.
But I think they engaged in it. Not so much Jessie Ray, but I believe that Cindy Hendy did too. So I think she's going to have a little bit of drilling, some, you know, multi-tool action. Yeah, I know that's graphic and horrible, but we skipped over the details of what happened to these women. There are 60 people at least, that we haven't really identified or we suspect, whose families never had any consolation or closure on this. Yeah, it's just not enough. It wasn't enough. So
one of the things that I haven't finished reading the paragraph. I started to read it was after talking you through the audio recording that the Toolbox killers, that murder when they were torturing her, the mother had to listen to it to identify her voice. I didn't even get to the first sentence. I thought, I can't read another. I just can't even. My brain won't allow that thought to.
Was this your daughter? Is this your daughter's voice? That's what I have to hear.
Oh God, yeah. So on that note,
Jesus Christ,
yeah, God.
All right. Well, you've made me feel a bit better about being really going the hack on it.
No. I think it needs it.
All right, well.
On that note, sweet dreams, little sick babies. Why don't you go and have some, something that will dry you up and make you have crazy dreams? I'm not sure that you'll have a good sleep after that. I'll have some
pseudoephedrine.
That's the word, also.
Oh, that'll keep us awake. Yeah.
Ask the pharmacist, resident pharmacist, amongst other things.
Well, it'll be me. Thank you very much. And as we say every week, miss you already.
Ciao, lovelies.
Bye, guys. Ciao.
Ciao, ciao, ciao.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Trial by Wine. You can contact us at trialbywine@gmail.com. Please rate, review and subscribe to Trial by Wine on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to support us, you can become a patron at www.patreon.com, Trial by Wine, or visit our website www.trialbywine.com to donate to us. Your support will help us cover many more cases and apply wacky sentences. We really appreciate you listening and hope you tell everyone about us. Our cover art is by John Christo and music is by Beauchamp from pixabay.com.